Hey folks, so I recently started a new Skyrim file for attempt number, I have no idea, of actually playing the game for more than 20 hours. Now I know, it's not quite Zelda, but this recent playthrough reminded me of a little idea I had years ago regarding the game and the Legend of Zelda series, back before the days of the glorious Breath of the Wild, before the Zelda series went open world and flipped its format upside down. I'd played most of the Zelda games and decided to give Skyrim what I think was maybe its second attempt to play for more than 20 hours at the time. And during this, it had me thinking about something big that involved the Zelda series, something unthinkable for that time. And that was my thoughts on how Zelda should become more like Skyrim. And I'll be telling that story today. And we'll be getting to it shortly, but firstly, the oh so important message to all of you lovely folks before getting into a video of mine. Be sure to go and grab yourself a snack or drink, or both, and send them in to get featured right here. Be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already, it really helps the channel out, and let's get into this one. To set the scene, the year was probably around 2014, there or thereabouts. A young me, before having even started this channel, was happy, playing my Zelda games again and again, having the time of my life. During this time frame, I also gave another fantasy adventure game a go, Skyrim. I'd of course heard of it and the other Elder Scrolls games, but never really gave it a go. That was until one fateful day I got the Xbox 360 edition of Skyrim. I loved the game from the get-go. I think I played at most 30 or 40 hours at the time, but that was enough to have me hooked. I struggled to keep on top of playing it consistently because at that age of still being in school, owning an Xbox and having friends that also owned Xboxes, I was also playing a lot of other games with them. But when I did manage to delve into the land of Skyrim, I loved it. The adventures into the unknown, the variety of monsters to battle, the hundreds of quests, the stunning towns, the magical mages, the deep dark dungeons, the beautiful views, and of course, slaying dragons. And all of that is just the base level points of interest in the game. There are so many little hidden details to find out about and learn. Sound familiar? Well, that's because on paper, it does fit the description of The Legend of Zelda more or less, but there is one big difference. At this point in time, Skyrim was an open world game, and the Zelda series was still linear. The latest 3D installment was Skyward Sword, which of course follows a linear storyline, as did all the games before it, with exception for the first game. On paper, the games were very much alike, bar that one key piece. And at that time, I began to pick up on that. One thing led to another, and eventually I found myself saying, I wish Zelda could be more like Skyrim, mainly getting at the open world side of things, but also some other things such as overworld bosses. But little did I know that my wish would come true. The thing is, I grew up playing Zelda. It was the main video game series of my childhood, thanks to my dad who was, and still is, a huge Zelda fan. Well, just video games fan overall. But when Skyrim was introduced to me, I definitely saw that my favourite video games could learn something from this fellow fantasy adventure, like an older cousin of sorts. There was so much potential for the Zelda series to explore here. The funny thing is, Skyrim was a defining game for the open world video game genre, the defining game of that time. Breath of the Wild then went on to be the next defining game of open world video games. It's almost like it was meant to be. If we look at how Breath of the Wild works as an open-air adventure and compare it to Skyrim, the similarities are there. Both games have a main quest to follow, but no mandatory linearity to follow. You're free to do whatever you like, but also come back to the main story whenever you like. You can stop, start and go with almost any quest line. Breath of the Wild has a tad more freedom with this, but it's more or less the exact same in terms of freedom. In terms of scale, Breath of the Wild is significantly bigger in size, but we can put that down to the time frame these games were developed in. The world itself functions similar too, exploring various landscapes with very different climates, encountering overworld bosses, finding new quests along the way, and of course, taking in the stunning landscapes. Now, none of this is a coincidence. We actually know that Nintendo did draw some inspiration / research from Skyrim. In an interview with the game's director Hidemaru Fujibayashi and the producer Eiji Aonuma, we can learn all about this. I'll link the interview below, but to summarise the key points, they discuss how in order to tackle a project on the scale of Breath of the Wild, something that they'd never done before, they looked at games with a similar world to what they wanted. Skyrim. They played some of the 5th installment to the Elder Scrolls to retrieve data on how an open world game of the sort of scale they were aiming for would work, what to expect in building this open world Hyrule, the sort of challenges and obstacles they may come across, and just how this open world Zelda game would live and breathe. Skyrim helped here. The defining game for open world adventures of that time helped to shape the next game that would achieve such a feat. Redefining a genre is huge. Obviously Breath of the Wild doesn't owe its development to Skyrim, but it's cool to know that Skyrim helped shape the game in some ways. The main point of my little story is that all those years ago I was sitting there in my bedroom playing Skyrim and thinking to myself, Zelda games could be more like this. And what would you know? A few years later, we saw exactly that. Breath of the Wild. To conclude, the one thing I'd personally take away from this story of mine is that the progression and development of video games is always going to rely on other games. Not in the sense of one game in particular being necessary, but every game. If you take one small thing from every game, collectively, these all contribute to the future. But in this case, one of the redefining open world games played a role in shaping the next redefining open world game. Breath of the Wild needed somewhere to get this inspiration and data from to figure out how it would work in order to redefine the genre itself, almost like a helping hand. This whole thought came back to me the other day during my new and current playthrough of the game, and despite almost giving up on it a few days ago because I lost 2 whole damn days of progress due to a bug in the game, classic Skyrim, I got back to it, and I'm really enjoying it now, but the reminder of this thought just made me really want to make a video talking about it. Having now played Breath of the Wild and coming back to Skyrim, I can really see the similarities and see that what I wanted to happen did happen. They're both open world fantasy adventures, both have swords and shields, mystical creatures a hero must slay, magic, but yet they're so different at the same time. To me, Breath of the Wild could be viewed as a Zelda-themed Skyrim, especially if you look at it from the view of before the game was ever released. And that's my short story on why Breath of the Wild is basically Zelda Skyrim. Thanks a ton for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to drop a like and consider subscribing for more fabulous Zelda content. If you haven't already, be sure to hop in our Discord server through the link below. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram to keep up to date, and as always, a huge special thank you goes out to all of my supporters across Patreon and YouTube. If you'd like to join them and get yourself a shout out upon joining and your name at the end of every video, then consider supporting. Again, thanks for watching, and until the next time, I've been Hyrule Gamer.